I ran across this quote by Robert Adams, and it strikes me as true. See below. The quote is, that's a long question, I read the quote. The more you read, the more knowledge you gain. And who profits by this? The ego. Every book that you read gives you more intelligence. Who has intelligence? The ego. Every time you think you have to meditate, it is the ego that is meditating. Does the self have to meditate? Does reality have to meditate on reality? All of the gurus you have seen, everything that you have done has actually put you back in time. Not forward, but back. Well, then Robert was the only guru of this person who, unlike all the gurus they had seen, that everything that you have done didn't put you back in time. That's what he's right. That's what he's saying. Otherwise he would be one more guru like the other gurus, and his saying would also put us back in time. Right? So he's a different guru. He's a guru that doesn't put you back in time. Okay, so now I read the question. My question is, are meditation and spiritual practices and going to retreats for the ego? Question. My answer is this. All the people who are going to Sedona or Los Angeles to attend Robert's satsang, was it useless? Was it the ego? There is some inner contradiction here. It reminds me of Krishnamurti, who used to say, oh, the gurus, they are all junk. But the question that comes, but what are you doing here standing? You see, it's a little bit, you have a little bit of a logical problem there. And effectively, with Krishnamurti, who was my guru for a while, it seems that the people who had stayed with him, they didn't go anywhere. He was telling, you've been here for 20 years, I've seen you for 30 years, and you're still as stupid. So perhaps he was one of those gurus. An inefficient one. When I met my teacher, that was a problem that I had about this thing with Krishnamurti. So I asked my teacher, what? You know, Krishnamurti, these people have been around him for ages, and nobody has even achieved realization. So my teacher told me, when I met my guru in India, I asked him 3 questions. Number 1, are you happy? Yes. Number 2, does your happiness depend on anything? Health, wealth, relationships? No. 3rd question, can you take me there? Yes. That was a guru. Huh? Good questions. But that was a guru. And when Jean told me that, I felt this weight that I've been dragging, being around the books of Krishnamurti for 2 years or 3 years, that this kind of inaccessibility of realization. You know, that it's for special being, like Krishnamurti, but for the common of mortals, there is no way we can get there. So with Jean Klein, it was easy. He said, can you take me there? Yes. So it was like, can you take me to the other side of the mountain? Or can you take me on a walk to the plateau? Yeah, sure, let's go. Let's do that tomorrow, let's go for it. It was so matter of fact and easy. And that was for me a big liberation. So, well, I would say that regarding meditation and spiritual practices and going to retreats, and more generally speaking, regarding the teachings, the goal of the teaching is to take you where the teacher is. Just as the role of the guide in the mountains is to take you to the other side of the mountain or wherever the guide has already been, hopefully, right? Hopefully, because, if you go climbing something with a guide who has never been there, maybe a little dangerous. So I wouldn't recommend it. Unfortunately, there are many guides in the spiritual guides who have never been there, but that's a different story. The role of the teacher is to take you there. Can you take me there? Yes. The role of the teacher is to take you there. So the question is, are meditation and spiritual practices and going to retreats useful or not? He says, are they for the ego? But the question behind that is, are they useful or not? And the answer is, if the teacher is there, they are useful. If the teacher has been there, they are somehow useful. If the teacher has never been there, they are useless. So, in other words, the meditation and spiritual practices and the retreats, what is done is not important. Is what you are suggested to do comes from that matters, not what you do. Okay, I keep reading now. So my question is, are meditation and spiritual practices and going to retreats for the ego? First of all, I'm sorry, but I don't use the word ego. I use the word ignorance. Already the use of the word ego, there is some element there, because it gives ego some kind of credibility, some kind of substance, whereas ignorance being qualified as a belief, in my book, a belief may or may not be substantial. A belief that turns out to be false was insubstantial from the beginning. A belief that gets confirmed as a fact, of course, was substantial. But a belief is not substantial right off the bat. A belief is suspended between true and false. Unlike the ego, that's something right there. No matter what it is something that has physicality that I have to get rid of. And then I start a big battle to kill the ego. Okay, I keep reading. In other words, something is done on the behalf of the small self, the belief and feeling of being a separate entity, and therefore the question is, when do these activities possibly or potentially enlarge the ego? Well, what is wrong here is the assumption that something is done on the behalf of the small self. If meditation, spiritual practice, going to retreats, is done on the behalf of the small self, of course, then you're right. Possibly, these practices are going to enlarge the ego, the ignorance, or to keep us in ignorance. But what if meditation and spiritual practice and going to retreat comes from a different place? You see? The first time you go to, you enter the spiritual path, in many cases, is for the sake of the ego. In other words, you want some improvement in your life. You have a psychological problem, you have a health problem, you have some kind of problem you want to get rid of. But, so then, you go to a teacher. If the teacher is free, if the teacher is not, he may alleviate this problem, but the mother of all problems have not been removed, you will go from teacher to teacher. At some point, hopefully, you find a teacher who is free from ignorance. And then you will get somehow a sample of the experience of your true nature. If you are open to it, if you want it, if you ask for it, you'll get a sample. The mind may not recognize it. But then the next time you go to a retreat, or you do a spiritual practice, or you do something that has been suggested by your teacher, or you watch a video, or you read a book, there is going to be an element of causeless joy attached to this activity. In other words, the reward is not really at the end of the activity, but it is at in the very beginning of it. So you will enjoy reading books, going to retreats, meditating, and doing spiritual practices. In this case, it is not an enlargement of the ego, it is the asphyxiation of the ego. He goes on, I realize all this is contextual based on the spiritual maturity of the student, and that calming and focusing the mind can be valuable at times. That's not the point here. However, there seems to be a basic paradox of the ego asking for its own death. Since the ego is by nature that illusory self which wants to continue as a long-lasting independent entity. So let's dissect this sentence and all its inherent contradiction. There seems to be a basic paradox of the ego asking for its own death. Since the ego is by nature that illusory self, which wants to continue as a long-lasting independent entity. So here is the contradiction. If the ego is an illusory, how could an illusory entity could really want to continue as a long-lasting independent entity? How could an illusory entity want anything? How could an illusory entity do anything, such as meditating or do spiritual practices? How could an illusory entity want anything? So I hope I am pinpointing here the inherent contradiction in this sentence, where on one hand you grant ego, ignorance, an illusory status, but on the other hand you don't see the alleged activities of this illusory entity as being equally illusory. And not only illusory, but even impossible. So, and he goes on, and since it doesn't exist in reality, it therefore takes effort, repetition to maintain. How can something that doesn't exist require effort to maintain its existence? So, the problem is that you grant reality to ignorance. The ignorance, and you see this independent entity, the ego, as the source of ignorance, wanting to be ignorant, whereas in fact, ignorance is simply a choice made by consciousness. There is no ego whatsoever. It's ignorance who chooses to believe that there is an ego. So it's consciousness who chooses to believe there is an ego. It's a choice that we make. So the origin of ignorance is not a separate ego entity. It's we who choose it by deciding against any evidence that we are a separate consciousness, a separate reality. I've also, I keep reading, heard Robert say that spiritual practices make one dumb and passive. Krishnamurti said dull. But again, I suppose this is in the context of the ego-driven practice and goal-oriented search. Yes, it is true of any called self-improvement practice, in a sense. But a self-improvement practice is not a spiritual practice. It doesn't take us to the spirit. It just begins and ends with ignorance. So he goes on. So wouldn't it be better, once one has had tastes of the background of peace, bliss and beauty, and it is also understood that meditation is one's real, timeless, unconditional nature, to simply observe oneself and one's reaction and abide in silence as best one can. Any more practice than that is gilding the lily, so to speak. Yes, but even simply observe oneself and one's reaction, it's still also a practice. The point is, when we are not in ignorance, there is no point doing anything, any practice. We have just to enjoy whatever is going on. The practice is useful only when we are in ignorance, as a stepping stone out of the swimming pool of mud. That's